Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on UK politics. Due to my main account being hacked, I only get to talk British politics once a week at the moment. In return, you get a lot of British politics today, I made sure of that. So let's get started. Irish Prime Minister or Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has struck a conciliatory tone in the dispute with the British government over the special Brexit rules for Northern Ireland. Mistakes were made on all sides, according to the leader of the Fine Gael party. Varadkar began a second term as Prime Minister or Taoiseach in December. He was the head of government in Dublin from 2017 to 2020 and had negotiated the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol together with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the time, and not to forget the EU. Despite Brexit, the agreement is intended to prevent a return of border checks on controls between EU member Ireland and the north of the Emerald Isle. Otherwise, it was feared that the conflict would flare up again between predominantly Catholic supporters of reunification of the two parts of Ireland and the mainly Protestant supporters of a union with Britain. Goods checks between Northern Ireland and the other British parts of the country are now necessary. The Protestant DUP party rejects the protocol and blocks the formation of a government in the region. Varadkar said he understood the unionist concerns and admitted the rules in Northern Ireland Protocol were originally a bit too strict. Varadkar left no doubt that he believes Britain's exit from the EU is the cause of the problem. The red lines in the talks are therefore to prevent border checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland and the integrity of the European single market. Well, back in office, Varadkar seems to be, or trying to be, very diplomatic. He knows what's at stake there with some compared to the past, minor troubles already starting again. But of course, he knows why this protocol is so important, and he knows that Brexit is the problem. And the UK side will have to move, not the EU side. They made a lot of suggestions to prevent this. On January 31st in 2020, the British flag officially waved in front of the European Parliament in Brussels for the last time. On that day, Brexit took place, the exit of the United Kingdom from the EU. Now, almost 3 years later, 65% of Britons, that's around 2/3 of the population, want the 2016 referendum to be repeated, and that's according to a poll commissioned by the Independent newspaper. The UK has been hit hard by Brexit. The country has struggled with several government crises and is currently dealing with a severe economic crisis. And 56% of Britain stated that leaving the European Union would have harmed the domestic economy. A year ago, that was just 44%. The promises made by Brexit supporters have not been fulfilled, and the country's global influence has significantly deteriorated. In the event of a new referendum, 54% of respondents said they would vote for re-entry into the EU. Living, learning, working without borders. 30 years ago, the European single market started with freedom for job seekers, entrepreneurs, and investors. And today, this is taken for granted. But Brexit has shown that it is not. As I said, the single market has existed since January 1st in 1993. The EU member states plus Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein form the European Economic Area, with Switzerland as an associated member. In addition to the abolition of internal borders, customs duties and goods checks, 4 basic freedoms were created, which include the free movement of people, of goods and services, as well as capital. While the freedom to travel and the opportunity to work abroad are largely a reality, there are still numerous hurdles in other areas. Many regulations have not yet been standardized across Europe, which can make trade in goods, the exchange of services and investments considerably more difficult in individual cases, so not generally. This affects many exports and especially financial services, and that is why the European Banking Union is seen as a major construction site where little progress has been made for many years. although the conditions for this are particularly favorable with the common currency, the euro. The introduction of the euro in 1999 as book money and in 2002 also as cash made prices in all member countries comparable at a glance. This has also increased transparency for consumers in cross-border purchases and services both domestically and abroad. As a result, many things have become cheaper and have strengthened the competitiveness of the European economy. The German federal government points out that the European single market is the largest single market in the world in terms of economic output measured in terms of gross domestic product of more than 12 trillion euros. In addition, there have been no customs duties within the European Union since 1968. In this context, the British exit from the EU is to be understood as a serious setback. Great Britain's exit from the EU, which took place in 2020, was the most serious setback for the European economic project to date. The British didn't introduce the euro but instead kept the pound sterling. However, the government in London rejected all EU regulations and had everything renegotiated, which was only partially successful but quite annoying. So I'm not sorry they're gone on that behalf. As a result, tariffs, travel restrictions, and many other obstacles to economic relations between the UK and the EU are back on both sides of the English Channel. Brexit provides a chilling example with the higher inflation and weaker economic growth it is causing in the UK, according to the UK Central Bank, the Bank of England. Conversely, for the trading nation Germany, with its many exports to the EU, the advantages of the internal market and EU membership can be clearly seen, namely more prosperity through increased economic output and a better private quality of life, for example, through the freedom of movement. The German federal government points out that companies in the common market could manufacture and offer their products in larger quantities. This reduces costs and not only brings low prices for consumers. This also strengthens international competitiveness compared to other domestic markets such as the USA or China. And the free movement of capital makes it possible to invest money anywhere in the Union. Perhaps the most important thing for the German federal government is the freedom of movement of people. EU citizens can travel, they can live, they can study and work anywhere in the Union. Anyone can apply for a job in another EU country, conclude employment contracts, and must not be disadvantaged because of their citizenship. This should also apply to professional qualifications such as diplomas or master's certificates. In addition, rights acquired abroad from the pension insurance are not lost. That and the European health insurance create the general conditions for retirement anywhere in the European Union. And I had to bring up some of these advantages today in another video when I was talking about Brexit, because that is what a lot of people in the UK are missing out on now. And most sane people here agree that Brexit was a mistake, but still, the Brexiteer commenters still put the comments in there with the same crap for months. I said it yesterday, but I still have to repeat it because before I'm filming this, I saw a lot of those comments again. Brexit was a mistake. And it's not that their government has not finished implementing Brexit. What Brexit have you voted for? In the 2016 referendum, you just decided on leaving the EU. And nothing else was on the ballot paper. So, what is the real Brexit that you voted for? The Brexit you voted for that was on the ballot paper, you got it 100%. You got 100% of that. Britain is out of the EU, all the political parts, and Britain is out of the single market, and Britain is out of the customs union. So that's what you voted for. And nothing else was on the ballot paper. So, well, we still have to hear that crap, and they still come up with the Ramona button and so on. But as I talked about the people wanting back into the EU, Uwe made quite a good comment on that yesterday after my video, where I already said it, that it will be very complicated for the UK to get in anyway. They would have a high price to pay compared to their first membership if they want to rejoin, because they will not get all the benefits back. Every new member will have to bring the same into the EU, and the UK will not be an exception. And that's why Uwe commented quite rightly on that. It will be decades. I don't see the UK rejoining the EU in the near future. And some others rightly commented it probably will be, or it could be, England applying for rejoining the EU, because Scotland is gone, Wales is gone, Northern Ireland is gone. That's all possible scenarios because of Brexit. I never would have said that if we hadn't had Brexit, because the whole situation would be different. There would be no reason for a second Scottish independence referendum with the Supreme Court stopped without the consent of the British government. But I'm not sure that they really would discuss about this without Brexit. And so, yes, it was a mistake, and it will be a mistake. Thousands of UK rail workers are walking out to seek pay rises and better working conditions. Travel should only be undertaken if absolutely necessary. That was warned by the RMT union. Most Brits don't understand that, though. Thousands of rail workers in the UK have started a 4-day strike recently. An eerie calm reigned in normally busy London train stations on Tuesday. That was the first normal working day of 2023 after the New Year's holidays. According to the RMT union, 40,000 employees of the state railway network Rail and 14 private railways followed the strike call. RMT has called 2 48-hour strikes on Tuesday and Wednesday, and on Friday and Saturday. There should also be disruptions on Thursday when I'm filming this, because another railway union, ASLEF, has called for a 5-day walkout. Network Rail warned of serious disruptions this week on large parts of the rail network. Travel should only be undertaken if absolutely necessary. RMT is calling for significant wage increases and improvements in working conditions in view of persistently high inflation in the country. The union accuses the country's Conservative government of intervening in negotiations with companies to prevent an agreement. Transportation Secretary Marc dismissed that. He called on the unions to return to the negotiating table. The call for a strike is unhelpful and harms the rail industry and the interests of workers. That's what he told Sky News. Rail workers, like workers in a variety of sectors, have gone on strike several times in recent months. In December, the healthcare sector was particularly affected. The government sometimes used the military for ambulance trips, for example, and in addition, postmen and employees in the telecommunications sector also stopped working. Border police also went on strike at several airports over the holidays. Here too, the government called on the military for help. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has openly spoken out against sharp pay rises in the public sector. It would only fuel inflation further. According to a YouGov poll published at the end of December, around 2/3 of Britons support the health sector strikes. There is less understanding for the strike at the railway, though. Only 43% of those surveyed supported it. And I can understand that people, of course, are seeing a big disruption in their life, and they do not support that as much. But if you look at the politics of the last 12 years, me as not the biggest friend of unions, I do understand why they are doing this. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has announced a significant slowdown in inflation, debt reduction and the fight against illegal migration as his policy goals for the year that has just started. I want to promise you 5 things today, said the Conservative during a speech in London. Inflation will be halved, the economy will grow, national debt will fall, waiting times in the National Health Service, the NHS, will be reduced, and immigration across the English Channel from France will be stopped. Does he have a djinn somewhere or so, a genie? These are the priorities of the people and thus also the priorities of his government, which should also be measured against them. No tricks, no double entendres, Sunak said. Either we deliver or we don't deliver. We know what we have to expect. Sunak also promised deeper long-term changes. The Prime Minister has been criticized for numerous problems in Great Britain, though. Thousands of workers are, as I said, on strike over demands for higher pay. Inflation is at its highest level in about 40 years, and economists predict a prolonged recession. And waiting times for doctor visits are at an all-time high. I come to that in this video as well. Inflation in Great Britain has recently weakened somewhat, starting from a comparatively high level. In November, consumer prices rose by 10.7% year-on-year, according to the ONS Statistics Office in mid-December. In October, the rate was 11.1%. That's the highest level since they began to count in early 1997. Experts expect the economic crisis to be more severe and longer than in comparable countries. This is partly due to Brexit and the high susceptibility to fluctuating gas prices due to low storage capacities. Sunak has been in office since October after his predecessor Liz Truss resigned after just a few chaotic weeks as Prime Minister under pressure from her party. So 45-day Liz was another reason, but Brexit still plays a major part in that, and people who are denying that are living in some, I don't know, we would call it cloudy cuckoo life. It's unbelievable that people still try to defend Brexit after we get proof over and over that Brexit is the cause for a worse economy than anywhere else in the G20. At the turn of the year, the desire for self-determination and a new independence referendum is growing in Scotland. According to the latest surveys by the British opinion research institute YouGov, many more Scots are now in favour of independence than of remaining in Great Britain. If one disregards the undecided part of the respondents, according to YouGov, the supporters of independence in Scotland now come to 53% and the opponents to only 47%. That's the clear change in mood since the last survey in October, when the proportion of those opposed to Scottish independence was just over the top. A similar trend has emerged from 3 separate surveys by other survey institutes in the past few weeks. The main reason for this development is believed to be the ruling by the UK Supreme Court last month, in which the court banned Scots from launching an independence referendum without the consent of London. According to YouGov, 57% of Scots who have an opinion say Scotland must have the right to hold a new referendum. Growing resentment that the central government in London is persistently denying Scotland a new referendum seems to be strengthening the separatist camp led by the 2 governing parties in Edinburgh, the Scottish National Party, the SNP, and the Scottish Greens. A number of Scots have recently complained that England's Tories have enslaved Scotland and want to keep them in the UK against their will. There can no longer be any talk of a voluntary partnership between those 2 countries. SNP leader and Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has said she respects the Supreme Court's ruling and is not planning a referendum that could be legally challenged. However, she maintains that she has an electoral mandate in Scotland to demand a referendum from London. Sturgeon now plans to turn the next UK general election, which has to be held by the end of 2024, beginning of 25, into a de facto referendum on Scottish independence. Her party is supposed to go into these elections with just one single point on its agenda, that of demanding independence. What that will look like in detail and whether it would really bring the Scots closer to a referendum is still unclear. Even within the SNP, there is some skepticism about the strategy. And meanwhile, Sturgeon's government is attempting to deliberately and ever more resolutely distance themselves from the Tory government in London. Thanks to the, though limited, self-government that Scotland enjoys and the little influence of the Conservatives there, It already offers better welfare benefits than the rest of Britain in many respects. For example, there is free medicine on presentation of a doctor's prescription, free courses for students living in Scotland, and free personal social assistance for senior citizens in the country. In its latest budget statement, the Scottish Government also slightly increased tax rates, which it has the power to change for the, let's call it, affluent part of the population, to help the growing number of people in financial distress. The surcharges are also expected to provide an extra £500 million to go towards the ailing health service. Clinic strikes like those that took place in England in December have so far been avoided in Scotland by offering a 7.5% wage increase to nurses. The government responsible for England, Rishi Sunak, has offered its hospital staff with inflation at just under 11%, only 4%. And to make it perfectly clear where she sees her current priorities, Sturgeon has now given £20 million set aside to host an independence referendum as additional help for needy citizens to pay their electricity and gas bills. This has been applauded even by the Scottish opposition because, in their view, it shows that the SNP has abandoned its referendum plans for the time being. Of course, Sturgeon's calculus could be that she can further increase the growing number of Scots who wanted independence if she shows, and she shows her fellow citizens, how much better and more social her politics are than the Tory of England. In other words, how much more you think Scotland could do if it were completely out of the UK. The Scottish First Minister wants to bring her country back into the European Union. And her reasoning is clear. Brexit has changed the situation in such a way that a new referendum has to take place. In 2014, a majority of Scots, with 55.3%, voted against independence. The government in Edinburgh announced before Christmas that it would like to discuss its future independence strategy in March. There is a lot of stake for London as well. The Conservative Party, which governs Westminster, has not been able to get its foot on the ground in Wales and Scotland for decades, and, in the special case of Northern Ireland, is not even up for election there anyway. Critics complain that the Tories are therefore increasingly pursuing a nationalist English policy. And if this trend continues, Great Britain could become a little England in a few years. And that is not that improbable as this Tory government might think at the moment. But I have to side with the SNP. The SNP is a very social democratic party from my point of view as a conservative. But in the case of Scottish independence, I absolutely have to agree with them. The Scots have the right to decide themselves because they joined via a contract as a country, and they are not compared to anything else. Britain's Tories around Prime Minister Rishi Sunak are currently in a difficult position among the population. That's what polls show. The head of government's current plans should reinforce this trend, and at least among the trade unions, because Rishi Sunak wants to restrict the right to strike with the new regulation. The proposed law, which is still limited to rail transport, could be extended to the entire public sector. The signal to employees is devastating with that. Tory boss Rishi Sunak is currently preparing anti-strike laws for the railways. Great Britain's head of government wants to regulate by law that 20% of the connections must be maintained even during a strike. That's what The Guardian reports. Further tightening of the right to strike is also possible. Details on this are still pending. Experts expect the unions to challenge Sunak's new regulation in court. The Tories are likely to have much more to do with their request than just going on with some trains. Because strikes are already generally only permissible if half of the union members join. In the transport, education and health sectors, the threshold is even higher. There, 40% of all eligible members have to vote for the strike, not just 50% of those who vote. Sunak's initiative reminds critics of Boris Johnson here. The ousted ex-prime minister wanted to use temporary work to break the railroad strikes. And meanwhile, Labour, under opposition leader Keir Starmer, has so far refused to support many of the protesters in the current wave of protests. According to The Guardian, Starmer has signalled that he does not want to accept any further restrictions on the right to strike, though. Rishi Sunak's proposed legislation is worrying various sectors in the UK. The Tories' planned anti-strike laws are worrying so much that observers believe the regulations could quickly spread to other areas of the public sector, such as healthcare. Strike options for the fire brigade or teachers, for example, could also be massively restricted by similar regulations. Recently, there had been mass protests and also strikes in Great Britain, including work stoppages at the NHS State Health Service. Many Britons are affected by poverty, and the state wants to limit their opportunities for industrial action also. Dave Penman, General Secretary of the FDA union representing civil servants, told the LBC the legislation would not address the problem of low wages as a cause of strikes. According to The Guardian, he said, "It would be a political decision for the Prime Minister, but it will not solve the problem." One of the largest waves of strikes in recent decades is rolling in Great Britain at the moment. The Conservative push comes at a time of one of the biggest strikes wave in Britain in 30 years. There have recently been strikes in various areas, especially in the public sector. Not only did the railway go on strike, but work at the post office was also sometimes stopped. And according to German media, a total of 100,000 nurses in England and Wales recently stopped working in just one day. But not in Scotland, by the way. I mentioned that earlier. The situation is particularly precarious in the healthcare sector. Union representative Terry Stubbs recently explained to German media what the employees were concerned about. The work pressure, the long waiting times, the lack of investments, and of course our salaries, he said. The wage increases of the last 10 years were like a wage reduction, according to the union representative. If the Tories have their way, Stubbs' opportunities to campaign for improvements could soon be significantly limited. And that is something we always see with this Tory government, no matter what the name of the Prime Minister is. Limiting democracy is their answer to problems they caused themselves. And how far are these Tories willing to go with undermining democracy in the next years until we will see a general election? I don't even want to think about that. Britain's current Prime Minister brings a lot of new things to the country's most important political office. At 42, Rishi Sunak is the youngest Prime Minister in more than 200 years. He's also the first Hindu in office. A supposedly minor innovation is currently an issue in Great Britain, though: the Prime Minister's vehicle fleet. According to a recent report by The Independent, Rishi Sunak will be driven to appointments in an armoured limousine from the Ingolstadt car manufacturer Audi. Great Britain's Prime Minister and the country's top political officials are to get into a chic A8 in the future. This breaks with a long tradition because for more than 30 years, the British car manufacturer Jaguar has always provided the armoured vehicles of British top politicians. Well, British Jaguar, I know. But it wasn't Sunak who chose his new car. The decision was not made voluntarily. The Metropolitan Police, who are responsible for the Prime Minister's security, announced in the summer that they would switch from the Jaguar XJ to the Audi A8 or A8, and criticism followed, of course. But now The Independent is also reporting the reason for the decision. According to this, no British car manufacturer was able to meet the safety requirements. The background is as simple as it is bitter for Great Britain. Brexit is apparently partly to blame for the car misery. According to the report, the shortage of skilled workers and supply chain problems caused problems for the British auto industry even before leaving the EU. Brexit and the corona pandemic then made the situation even worse. According to The Independent, Labour politician Jonathan Reynolds speaks of a shattering situation in the industry. According to the report, it was not only Jaguar that was unable to meet the safety regulations for the ministerial limousines. Also, Mini, Bentley, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce and Co. could not deliver. According to the law, however, the Metropolitan Police Service not only has to go by safety regulations when procuring cars, but also by price. Specifically for this tender, at the time of the tender, there were no UK car manufacturers able to meet the requirements of the tender or produce a similar vehicle specification, so no UK manufacturer has bid for the contract. That was said by a British official that made a statement to the Independent. After all, only the requirements for top officials are not met. According to the government, lower-ranking officials can continue to drive in British-made cars. British-made by geographical location, I know. There's only one small or something real British car manufacturer left, because all the others are owned by China, India, France, Germany, or whatever. I just mentioned Mini and Bentley and stuff like that. So, yeah, but it's still an Audi, and everyone on the world will see that. In the UK, tens of thousands of people are currently waiting more than 12 hours to get medical attention in emergency departments. And now they really sound the alarm there, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak now promises improvement. According to estimates by associations, 300 to 500 people die every week in Great Britain because they do not receive timely or appropriate care in emergencies. The Vice President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, Ian Higginson, confirmed the figures that became known to the BBC over the weekend. He dismissed the suggestion that the difficulties were temporary. When you are there, you know it's a long-term problem, not just a short-term one, he said. In the past week, 1 in 5 patients picked up by an ambulance in England took more than an hour to get to the emergency room. Tens of thousands of patients had to wait more than 12 hours to be treated in the emergency room. You have to believe that. The British Medical Association, a federation of nurses, echoed the alarming statements. It's not true that the country doesn't have the resources to fix this mess, said the chairman, Phil Benfield. It's a political decision and patients are dying needlessly because of this decision, he said. Benfield described the current situation as unsustainable and called for immediate action by the government. The British government blames the consequences of the corona pandemic and the flu wave for the current situation and assures that it wants to do more for hospitals. In his New Year's greetings, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak named the NHS as one of his priorities. But how often have we heard that? The free NHS has suffered from harsh austerity measures for more than a decade, and recently there have been several strikes by healthcare workers, including nursing staff and emergency services. They wanted to increase pressure on the government to raise wages, but not only that, also to improve working conditions. The Conservative government is refusing wage increases despite record inflation of more than 10%. The differences between the German healthcare system here and the British one could not be greater. While here in Germany you have the choice between private and statutory health insurance, Great Britain uses a uniform system. This means that there is no classic health insurance in England. Instead, the state ensures that every citizen has access to medical care and assumes a large part of the costs for it. However, the British have to pay for some services themselves, such as medicines, visual aids or dentures. Nevertheless, there's one big thing in common. Britons have the option of taking out private supplementary insurance or full private insurance to protect themselves against high costs. The first point of contact for health problems is the local family doctor. However, the choice of general practitioners is often restricted and is influenced by place of residence and entry in a special register. Only those with supplementary insurance are really free to choose. Anyone who is referred to a specialist by their family doctor does not go to a practice as in Germany, but to a clinic. Since it can take a long time to get an appointment with a hospital doctor, private insurance also has advantages for patients here. Otto von Bismarck was the father of social health insurance in Germany and gave his name to Otto Nover. He founded the German health insurance system, which is financed from the social security contributions of the insured and enables all citizens to receive basic care. The British health system dates back to a 1940 report by British MP William Beveridge. In it, based on the idea of a welfare state, he proposed giving every citizen access to medical care regardless of their personal circumstances. The system should be financed by taxes. On his recommendation, the National Health Service England was formed a few years later. In principle, the system is similar to the citizens' insurance that is much discussed here in Germany, which I don't recommend though. The National Health Service England embodies the British health system to this day and is the employer for a large part of the medical staff. Reporting to the government, it is divided into 4 separate institutions for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The NHS organizes all medical care and its funding. The regional organizations decide, among other things, how the services in their region can be best supported and insured. Since it was founded in 1948, there have been repeated reforms and restructurings. In addition to the NHS, there's also the national insurance in England's social system, which, among other things, secures pensions in old age. In the UK, every citizen has a social security number, which is used to register social security contributions to distribute unemployment or old age benefits accordingly. Yeah, I have that number too. The employer also participates in the state provision for old age. The German healthcare system here is financed according to the principle of solidarity. Employers and employees pay into a large pot that finances the basic healthcare. The basic for the contribution is the level of income. Medical advances are primarily financed by private health insurance, where contributions are based on the personal risk of the insured. The welfare system in England is organized somewhat differently. As mentioned before, the healthcare system is not funded by social security contributions, but by taxes. The British therefore pay no direct contribution to health insurance. Instead, the state finances the health system, which is therefore closely linked to the state budget and the government's financial policy. For this reason, there have been repeated losses in the quality of treatment in recent years. The British health system offers citizens medical care that is virtually free of charge, regardless of their personal circumstances. Health spending in Great Britain is regulated by the state and lower than, for example, here in Germany. However, the austerity course regularly takes revenge, for example, when the flu breaks out. The corona pandemic in particular has clearly shown how different the healthcare systems in Britain and in Germany are. While the German system has received a lot of praise from abroad, experts warned of a possible collapse of the British health system at the beginning of the pandemic, and they have not been that wrong. In principle, state-funded care sounds advantageous, and in fact people in the UK are proud of their own healthcare system. But the almost free healthcare is always reaching its limits. The more doctors there are in a country, the better the care works. While the doctor density in Germany is 4.3 doctors per 1,000 inhabitants, in Great Britain only 2.9 doctors are responsible for the care of 1,000 inhabitants. In British hospitals, there are only 6.6 beds per 100,000 inhabitants. In Germany, there are 29.2 beds. The UK healthcare system is short of money, which is affecting the quality of care. With a shortage of intensive care beds and staff, many Britons are waiting longer for surgeries than other Europeans. In the case of non-essential surgery in particular, Great Britain brings up the rear in terms of waiting times. And we are talking about this a lot on my channel. And as a person who has the experience of both systems, especially at the time when my appendix burst. I was very close to die that time. Or now, when I'm still suffering from long COVID. I am so glad I'm back in Germany and being treated in the German healthcare system. Because I have been living in the UK and I know the NHS from personal experience. And so I have a direct way to have a look at both of them. And yes, the German system, from my point of view and from personal experience and from many experts I read about both systems, is the better one. Even if we still have a lot of trouble, there are still things that are not paid for by the general insurance. From my point of view, it should be. And there's still a lot of reforms to be made there. But it's not the worst system. And in Britain, we see at the moment, unfortunately, every day what's going on with the NHS. The recession and the consequence of Brexit are also affecting German companies in Great Britain. A survey of future expectations gave a rather mixed picture that was set by the head of the German-British Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the AHK, in London, and that is Ulrich Hoppe, and he told this to the German news press agency. Hoppe emphasized, however, that the prospects for the British economy were significantly worse. That has to do with the fact that the German companies that are here on the market are fundamentally more competitive and are therefore in a better position, he said. But of course, they also suffer from the fact that the economy here isn't growing as it would have if Brexit hadn't happened. Oh, he's so right. Around 2,500 German companies are active in Great Britain and employ around 450,000 people. According to a survey of a good 24 German heavyweights by the German Industry UK Association, they have been complaining about increased costs, more bureaucracy, and delays since Brexit. Great Britain also falls out of the top 10 German trading partners for the first time in 2022. Fewer German companies are also coming to Great Britain, although the country is doing well in two future-oriented industries, with offshore wind and hydropower. The pharmaceutical sector, with its good research location, is also promising. A lot will happen there, according to Hoppe. At the same time, the head of the AHK emphasized that there has been a shortage of skilled workers due to stricter immigration rules since Brexit. And according to Hoppe, he doesn't expect the British side to deviate from their strict rules. The current government is more interested in restricting immigration, he says. Germany remains Britain's second most important trading partner, said Hoppe. However, the drop in trade and the trade figures showed that the UK as a whole is trading significantly less than it used to. There was this whole idea of global Britain. It's still a mirage at the moment, said the AHK boss. The UK did not come out of the pandemic that strong in terms of trade. A certain decoupling of the British economy from the world trade has already taken place. The British government has not considered that many European producers also have locations in Great Britain. Since Brexit, they could no longer simply send material and employees back and forth. So Hoppe says it's no longer worth keeping this British side in the European network because even intermediate steps such as the secondment of employees and customs formalities involve a lot of bureaucracy. And this also has consequences for integration into world markets. However, Great Britain is too far away for integration into US value chains. The arrest of 7 people during protests again with the Iranian government that called London on the scene. The detainees are believed to be British-Iranian dual nationals. According to a newspaper report, the British government in London wants to officially classify the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist group because of the arrest of the 7 people with connections to Great Britain. The move, which is due to be announced in the coming weeks, has the backing of Britain's Security Secretary Tom Tugendhat and Home Secretary Suella Braverman. That's at least what the Telegraph newspaper reported on Monday, citing people familiar with the matter. The UK Home Office did not immediately respond to a request from Reuters for comment on the report. Iran's Revolutionary Guards arrested 7 people on Sunday during anti-government protests as they attempted to leave the country. Some of them have dual citizenship, according to a statement released by state media. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak then urged the Iranian government on Wednesday to end the detention of dual nationals, saying the practice should not be used as diplomatic leverage. Classification as a terrorist organization would mean that belongings to this group, attending its meetings and wearing its logo in public, would be criminalized. In Iran, the Supreme Court upheld another death sentence against a protester in connection with the protests as well. As reported by the Mizan Justice Portal, the young Mohammed was convicted of allegedly injuring security forces with a weapon. According to Islamic legal opinion in Iran, the accusation was waging war against God and is punishable by death. Human rights activists have repeatedly criticized the relevant fast-track negotiations as court trials as sham trials. After confirmation by the Supreme Court, judgments can no longer be appealed. And so far, 2 demonstrators have been executed in Iran for their involvement in protests. According to Iranian press reports, more than 20 other demonstrators are on the judiciary's death list. According to human rights groups, more than 500 demonstrators have already been killed in the course of the protests. The violent crackdown on the demonstrators, and in particular the 2 executions, were condemned at home and abroad. And over the weekend, security forces in the Kurdish city of Javanrud in northwestern Iran used violence again against a memorial service for demonstrators who were killed. While the street protests in other parts of the country have recently decreased, Iranians reported a threatening calm and increased hopelessness in the face of the violent government action and the difficult economic situation. The headscarf requirement is also to be pursued more strictly in some cases, including through video surveillance. Protests against the country's leadership have been going on in Iran for months. The trigger was the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in disputed circumstances in September after being taken into police custody for wearing clothing inappropriate under Iran's strict Islamic dress code for women. The protests pose one of the biggest challenges for the Shia Muslim-ruled Islamic Republic since the 1979 revolution. But Great Britain is not only campaigning against the regime in Iran. Britain is also helping Ukraine to clear mines and unexploded missiles now. The Ministry of Defense in London announced on Friday that more than 1,000 metal detectors and 100 bomb disposal equipment packages had been delivered. Russia's use of landmines and attacks on civilian infrastructure underscores the shocking ferocity of Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion, said Department Head Ben Wallace. This new British support package will help Ukraine safely clear land and buildings as it reclaims its rightful territory, he said. London is one of Ukraine's largest suppliers of arms, but also of other support. And so far, more than 11,000 Ukrainian soldiers have also been trained in Britain. And I'm quite happy about the involvement of the British there. Some people always are coming up when they don't like what I say. This is an anti-British channel. No, it's not. It's a channel that definitely disagrees with the politics of the current Tory government and the last Tory governments since the Brexit referendum and whatever happens there and what the members of this government do. But I'm not anti-British. I live there myself. I have a lot of friends there, be it in England, be it in Scotland, be it in Wales, be it in Northern Ireland. But it is this government I have a problem with. And I'm reporting what is happening. So I'm not taking Britain down in my videos. I'm reporting what is going on at the moment. It's not my fault that that is going on, that is what's happening in Britain now. But I'm absolutely glad the British are involved in global politics. Even if Boris Johnson was a big defender of the Ukraine, let's be nice and say partly for the fact that he wanted to save his own ass and his post in Downing Street number 10. But I'm glad that that was the result. I would like my government to do even more for Ukraine than they do now. There's still a lot of things they could do, they deny to do at the moment, which I think is completely wrong. But the democratic states have to stick together against things happening in Ukraine and also what is going on in Iran. Whenever I go to a group meeting on Mondays in the city center in the city hall, I pass demonstrations from Iranians against what is going on in Iran. And of course, I've direct contact here with Ukrainians and about the war, and with the help from my city to another city in Ukraine to help. And there it is so important that the British are a big part of this, a big part of the Western democracies that is helping there. So I thank the British government, not for much, but for this I do thank them that they do this. And I hope they will continue to do so. And I also was very glad to hear that the US Congress passed the budget with even more money to help Ukraine than President Biden even wanted. So there's a lot developing there in the aid part. But of course, if it's about me, the war would have to stop tomorrow. Russia would have to take their troops out of Ukraine, and that's it. But that's nothing that we're going to see as long as Putin is there. Or if the wrong people get rid of Putin, the war will go on. They will not just go back without that. But it is a very difficult situation, and I'm very glad, I must repeat this, that Great Britain is having a leading role in the help for Ukraine, and that they are taking steps against Iran now as well. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.